Hi, my name's Sally Lawson and I want to give you top 10 tips that you need to think about before you let your home. It's something that landlords think about. They want to get their properties let, but they don't think about the preparation involved, and that's really, really important, because if you get the preparation right, then you get your property let fast, and that's what it's all about. And there's 10 key things that you need to make sure you get sorted before you get your property on the market. So here they are. Number one, top 10 tip that you need to get on is make your property safe. It's the most important thing out of all the top 10 tips, is to make sure your property is safe. If it's not safe, you're not safe. You're liable to prosecution, you're liable to get yourself in trouble for not providing a safe property, and your tenants are in danger of suffering as a result. So you must make sure your property is safe electrically, gas regulations, fire safety, all those things need to be adhered to make sure that it is safe for human occupation, for the number of people that are going in there, as well as consider the type of person that's going in there. If they're elderly, infirm, disabled, got children, got pets, etc., make sure your property is safe. Very, very important. Second most important thing is to make sure the property is clean. Now, a lot of landlords pass this by and they think, well, it's all right, the tenant will clean it. But it's nothing worse than putting up with somebody else's dirt. And what is clean anyway? Your definition of clean may be totally different to somebody else's definition of clean. Clean in the property world should be no trace of previous human. So it doesn't matter if it's not totally up to date and perfectly decorated, but it must be clean. You must make sure your property is clean, because that way, when the property is returned, you can insist on it being clean as you left it, and that's really, really important. But number three is make sure that it's presented to suit your market. And this is important to help make sure that you get the right sort of tenant in the property, and to make sure that it lets quickly. Let me give you an example. If you've got an older property in a more suburban sort of town that would traditionally let to a mature couple in sort of an area that's surrounded by retired people, and you stick loads of IKEA minimalist furniture with white walls and white carpet, there's going to be a real clash in the way you've presented that property to the market that you're aiming at. You're going to alienate your potential market. So really think about what sort of market your property is going to go to, and who would be attracted by that furnishing, that decor and that presentation. So present your property for the market you're aiming to. If you're going for students, yes, you want modern, easy to clean, easy to replace type of furniture. More mature market, not so. Following on from that, you want to make sure that your legalities are in place and you've got everything where it needs to be. And one very important thing to consider is what sort of mortgage you have on the property and whether you've got consent. Now, if you've got a buy-to-let mortgage, you will already have consent to let. But if you've got a standard mortgage that you've bought the property to live in for yourself, you haven't automatically got consent to let. So you will need to approach your mortgage advisor and make sure that you've got some form of consent to let your property. They may require to see your tenancy agreements. They may give you a year's consent, 2 years consent. They may charge you an admin fee. But all this needs to be done to make sure that you're not breaking the terms of your mortgage. And trust me, that's really not something you want to be going down. It's quite an ugly issue if that's one that you end up in. Following on from that, number 5, if your property is a leasehold property, which many properties are, if you've got a lease, you need to make sure that you've got leaseholder consent. It can get pretty nasty when you find out that your leaseholders don't allow letting, will only allow letting to a certain demographic. We've even got one property that says the lease must be a minimum of 3 years in term. Ridiculous clause. But check your lease. What does your lease actually say about renting? Does it allow letting? Have you got an absolute okay to go ahead? Or do you need to get for consent to let? And quite often it does have a clause in there that says not to be unreasonably withheld, but it is something to consider and get that consent to let. Number 6 is insurance. We don't tend to think about insurance. We think, oh, I've got property insurance, that'll be okay. But in reality, if you've got householder insurance for you when you were living there, and then you rent it out, you've just invalidated the insurance in many cases, so you wouldn't actually be insured. So when you come to make a claim, the insurers will just be saying, well, who's this guy? Why has he had a chip pan fire? So you need to make sure that you notify your insurers that you're renting the property out. They will either continue to insure you or not, or you may have to seek specific insurance for landlords to make sure that you are actually covered and indemnified in the event of there being any issues. Number 7, what sort of tenancy agreement are you going to use? Now, there isn't a one-stop-fits-all here. Tenancy agreements vary. Could be an assured short-hold tenancy agreement. If you get approached by a company who wants to rent your property, it might be a company-let agreement or non-Housing Act contractual type tenancy agreement. If you're going to be renting it as a HMO and you're going to be providing services to the rooms, then you may have to consider a licence, so that's very unusual. But what sort of agreement are you going to use? What landlords use is they use a standard assured short-hold tenancy, or AST as they call it. But one mistake they make is they use the same one year in, year out, and that's a bit of a problem. Just to give you an idea, our tenancy agreements are updated at least 3 times a year. Legislation changes, new things come in and go. Experience will teach you that this and that needs to be changed and amended. You need to make sure that you're using a current, up-to-date tenancy agreement. One of the important ones at the moment is that prescribed information has got to be in there, so make sure that's sorted. Moving on from there, looking at the inventory, number 8. Have you got this inventory sorted? Now, I can assure you that an inventory is not a one-page document. An inventory can be 15 pages long. It can be even longer than that. It should involve each room by room description with contents of everything that's in there, with the colour, with the style, with the cleanliness of them, with any damage that's on there, the wear and tear of them. Are they in excellent condition, fair condition, slightly worn? If there's marks, where are they marked? How big is the mark? And don't forget those all-important fixtures as well. Some landlords say to me, oh, well, it's unfurnished, I don't need an inventory. And my reply to them is, well, how would you feel if you got the property back painted gloss black with no radiators? And they sort of look at me, dumbstruck. Because one property I went to see once, the landlord had just had a tenant move out of, it had been painted gloss black all the way through, and the boiler and radiators had been stolen. So in an inventory, you need to make sure you not only mention the items that can be moved, you also mention the decor, the colour of the walls, the type of the wallpaper, the carpets, the curtains, the radiators, the boiler, absolutely everything. The TDS now is getting very, very strict, so you've got to make sure that you've got everything written down, because that's your evidence of how you should get your property back and the condition you expect it to be in. Now, moving on to number 9, more recent times, the deposit registration is becoming quite complex, certainly with the recent Super Strike and Rodriguez case. It's important to make sure that you know which deposit scheme you're going to be using so that you've got your paperwork in order. You should know, as all landlords should know now, that you have to register any deposit that you hold. That deposit has to be registered in one of the schemes, either a custodial or insurance-backed scheme, and there's quite a few to choose from. However, what you must make sure you do as a landlord is that you issue a certificate to your tenants for that insurance scheme. You must also issue them the terms and conditions of that insurance scheme. Usually there's a leaflet or something you can give out to them from your provider to give them details of the actual scheme. You must also issue the prescribed information as to where their deposit is going to be registered and how they get it back, etc. That all needs to be done at the beginning. However, now we also need to do that when a tenant when a tenant renews, or when they hold over and roll over into an SPT. So don't forget that. You know, we used to be able to just register at the beginning and forget about it. We can't do that anymore. So renewals and SPT, you're still going to have to be looking at re-registering that deposit and reissuing the prescribed information, the leaflet and everything else. So quite a lot of detail to consider there. And finally, number 10 is about you. Are you educated enough in the law of landlord and tenant? Because if not, your tenants have access to the internet just the same as everybody else, and they can run rings around you and do this at your own peril. You need to know what laws you need to abide by, whether it be the rights of access, whether it be their rights of quiet enjoyment, whether it be laws against harassment, Landlord and Tenant Act, Fire Safety Order, Health and Safety Act, HHSRS, the Housing Health and Safety Rating System, Law of Property Act, Landlord and Tenant Act, you name it, you need to know, because all these things apply to you. Gas regulations, electric regulations, your repairing obligations. What do you have to repair versus what do they have to repair? Who's liable for what? What happens if they don't pay the rent and there's loads of maintenance? Can you say no? No, you can't. So it's important that you know what the laws are and how they apply to you, because that is what's going to make the difference between you having a trouble-free let and a very troublesome let. So I hope you found this useful. My name is Sally Lawson, and that was the 10 top tips for getting your property ready to let. Thank you very much.